After months of waiting, Doan Island is finally here. And spoiler alert, I really liked it. I'm so happy that this movie is finally out, and to celebrate this film's release, I was initially going to do a series review on the Gundam The Origin manga, but as you can tell, I kinda put it on hold for a bit, so I'm just gonna do this review anyway. And don't worry, if you're watching this without watching the film yet, I'll make sure to give you a spoiler-free review as well as a spoiler-filled review for those who have or haven't watched the film yet. Anyways, I'm extremely excited to give my thoughts on this film, so without further ado, it's time for Doan Island. Doan Island was a really good film, and will most likely be enjoyable to you if you're familiar with the original series. If you somehow don't know, this movie was adapted from the 15th episode of the original series called Cucuruz Doan Island. And while this film is obviously the better version of this episode, it is a much more enjoyable experience if you have the prior knowledge of the first series and a good understanding of the main characters like Amuro Ray and the rest of the White Base crew. And honestly, I have to say, being reunited with the White Base crew was just a wonderful feeling. I was kind of worried on how the characters would be this late on in the series compared to how it originally was, which was around the 15th episode. But everyone on the White Base are all the same personality wise. I don't know, it just feels like there was a really warm feeling when watching this film. It was surreal, but everything in this film, from its characters and how they were utilized, just felt right to me. I just really missing the cast back in action after all those years, and I'm really happy to see them all again, just for one last time. If you're someone who isn't familiar with this series at all, like I said, I highly recommend watching at least the original series or checking out the Gundam The Origin manga, which was entirely rewritten and drawn by the director of this film, Yoshikazu Yasuhiko. If you want some reasons to check out this manga, head over to the video where I suggested it. The main reason why I suggest to at least watch or read the first series is because there are some times where you need to have some context for who or where the characters are. And it's a good reminder actually that this movie takes place in the Origin continuity and not the original series. And some characters that haven't shown up yet are already here, and some that are in the original series aren't. But again, character work is really good in this movie. Everyone from the White Base crew are all great together. There are a few dynamics in this film that I really loved, and moments where I was genuinely laughing a ton. Action-wise, again, it's like the Origin OVAs if you've watched them. And if the words 3D animation keeps you up at night, there hopefully shouldn't be that much problems for this movie. I really thought the Origin's 3D animation was good, especially during the section where there were battles in space, and I think it's a little bit less chaotic in this movie. But there are many places where the 3D absolutely shines when it's blended with the 2D animation. But the 2D animation is great as well, from the mechs all the way down to each character. It was all handled beautifully. As I found out that this film was going to be an adaptation of the Doan Island episode, I believe that the action wasn't going to be center stage and it's more character focused, which is something I really loved about this series. It doesn't completely focus on the action, but when it does it really well. So I think that's all I could say without getting into spoilers. It's kind of hard for me to not go into spoilers, but it's a good watch. The characters are just how you remember them, the visuals and music are great. If you happen to check out the movie afterwards, you should totally come back to see the spoiler section, which is about to start right now. Yeah, I really liked this film. The scale of the conflict wasn't as massive as newer films like maybe Gundam Hathaway or God forbid Gundam Narrative, but honestly that just made me enjoy this film a lot more. And it's not too over the top, but it's a perfect in between, focusing more on characters and the overall narrative, but it had some good action, and starting right from the beginning, I love how so much more thought and care have been made to have all the characters from the White Base crew, the inhabitants of Cucuruz Doan Island, and the antagonists, the Southern Cross team, all naturally come to conflict with each other compared to the original episode. In the beginning of the film, we get a taste of the numerous people flooding the island trying to wipe out the pilot of Izaku that's kind of just doing his own thing without being either on Zeon or the Federation. And honestly, the way that Amuro and the White Base crew find out about the island was a lot more natural, even though it was a way that seemed unnatural for any other type of film. But it fits with the series. It all came down to a sort of mission briefing that Bright gives out, but surprisingly, he hands out very little info, only how there's an enemy there and that they need to find him and or terminate him. And I gotta say, it was a lot better how Amuro even got stuck on the island. It was already found. Everyone knows about what the island is, and he didn't conveniently find it while practicing docking. In the scene where he and his crewmates all search the island, and Doan more or less getting the jump on Amuro when he isn't looking, which was a really good scene by the way. When Amuro was looking around the island right by the edge, I honestly thought he was going to eject into Core Fighter, but instead he didn't, because I forgot it was part of the origin continuity, and we get the good old Zaku jump scare. And my favorite parts of this film are when Amuro meets the inhabitants of that island, when he eventually gets captured by the pilot of the Zaku, Cucuruz Doan. I felt that the whole heart of this movie is the interactions between Amuro and Doan and those children that he saved. And those very short but very beautifully animated and boarded scenes of Amuro and Doan's dreams and memories were handled perfectly. Amuro specifically was somewhat taken from the manga, and I'm all for it because it gave so much more weight to Amuro as a character, and it also gives the viewers a reminder of what Amuro went through ever since he stepped foot inside the Gundam. And as for Doan, for what little we see, I could draw a pretty good conclusion of what happened when and after he deserted. From what I remember from the show, it shows that a bunch of kids saw the death of their mother by Doan, and he decided to take care of those children as a way to atone for his sins, it seems. We are shown very little, but I guess the subtext of what was shown in that scene in the film made it more believable for me. He wasn't just killing families, he was invading a city, putting hundreds and thousands into harm's way, and it's more understandable why he decided to desert when he sees all the damage that he and his team has done. And I guess that became too much for him. And actually on the topic of Doan got the greatest glow up I've ever seen in any adaptation ever, and I will die on this hill. But getting back on track, I did think this movie was really good at showing the similarities between both Amuro and Doan at this point in the story, since Amuro has already left Jaburo at this point, which a while before that was when he deserted and ended up coming back to fight Rambo Rao. And this time he had to come to grips with his responsibilities as a soldier and as a pilot. And in this film he has to tackle that again, and I thought it was handled well. As he has matured a bit more, he can understand where Doan was coming from, yet he's still a bit naive. He absolutely understands why everyone on the island, besides Doan, maybe Kara, hate him. I saw a few people online say the absence of new type elements made the film significantly worse, but I kind of thought the opposite really. In the context of the narrative, Amuro is still just a kid who's trying to come to grips with his responsibilities and overall his burden as the pilot of the Gundam. And I think the fact that Doan and Amuro are so different but at the same time so similar allowed them to both bounce off each other really well in this film. But the more this film went on, the more different people showed up. And I think the second and third act for the most part were handled really well too. It makes a lot more sense for both Zeon and the Federation to be searching for the island, and why the Federation never gave Bright a reason as to why they're supposed to be searching the island, because there's a nuke that can send missiles to numerous countries and places around the world that could pose a threat to the Federation and potentially an advantage to the Principality of Zeon. They weren't really interested in Zone or Zaku. They're interested in making or preventing more casualties. This film also has a group of antagonists that were once allies of Doan in a group called the Southern Cross Team. And while they weren't the strongest antagonists in terms of how they were written or whatever, I still think they were fun to watch, and seeing them interact with Doan near the end of the film, and I really like their fighting styles, which I will definitely talk about later on. But the skating sort of Zaku's presented a really neat sort of combat for Doan and Amuro to fight against. And I really think that while the action in this film wasn't anything too crazy, I think this film allowed all the characters in the White Base to participate in this film. I really miss seeing interactions of different characters from the White Base, and honestly, with Slegger being introduced a lot earlier, since this is the Origins continuity here, this film really had some moments that I legitimately died of laughter. Like Slegger's horrible way of wording things to Sayla, which resulted in him getting slapped, and Bright having to pretend like the White Base is being a piece of crap and not starting up, so he basically can have the whole crew stay so it can find Amuro, was perfectly in character and it was really fun. I really enjoyed stuff like this. And like I said before, everyone's participating. There's also a lot of fan service too. Honestly, when I saw Char being announced to be in this movie, I was excited like many people would be, but also worried on how they would use him in this movie. I'm really glad he was only there for Amuro's dream sequence. Amuro's whole dream sequence felt like a great callback to the manga like I said earlier, as well as early events of the series. The one bit where he's in the Gundam and is terrified that he feels like the whole crew is abandoning him while re-entering the Earth's atmosphere was done to perfection, like I said earlier. And my favorite inclusion of fan service has to be the famous Bright Slap. That is one of the most iconic memes of the franchise that got animated. There were also characters like Mikuve that were brought into this film mainly to have him send the Southern Cross team over to Doan Island to set off the missiles. But I deep down always knew that he wouldn't be okay with it going off. When the whole thing went off in the end, I knew he was going to be okay with it, and I was right, I knew it. And as you can tell, this review is all over the place, but going back to the main characters of the film, Doan and Amuro, they were great in the climax. I've seen a lot of people not really like how brutal Amuro is in the parts where he gets the Gundam back, but honestly, it felt a little bit more in character for Amuro in the origin. At this point, he knows that in order to protect those people that are important to him, he has to fight for those people. In this case, he did. It's all fair to say that he is a bit different comparing both the original anime and the origin continuity too, but I guess feet scare people, not really surprised. Now, the final conflict was something that many people I've seen dislike, which is odd because it's where most of the action is, but I can kinda see why. The climax wasn't something as huge as maybe encounters in space, but like that movie, everyone on the crew has a crucial part in the final act. But in this movie, it's not too big of a role, as the focus is more on Amuro and Doan's fight against the Southern Cross team. And while I do think the 3D animation wasn't perfect, I think it looked fantastic in the later parts of the fight. Mainly Amuro's battle with the leader of the Southern Cross team. His Zaku's movements, like I said earlier, were really different from your normal Zaku because they skate. But there were times where I genuinely couldn't tell if the Zakus were 2D or 3D because it was so well mixed with the 2D effects work like the trails and debris that is left behind. Now, I want to talk about the resolution of this film because honestly, I shed a few tears watching it. Seeing Doan and Amuro come to grips with their burdens was great, but seeing them both fully help each other out while moving past their own burdens was a beautiful way to end this film off. It felt really fitting as the director's final send-off to Gundam as a whole, as it seems. It felt really sweet, especially when the movie started to play a new version of the original Tobei Gundam theme from the original show, and I knew it was going to hit hard, and it did, like a truck. Overall, I thought this film was a really good adaptation of the original episode that made parts of the episode that felt kinda silly get fixed and reworked in a more logical way, like the parts I mentioned in the beginning. And while some don't like the pacing and felt like the bits with the children were kinda filler, I don't really agree, and I honestly felt that it expanded upon the original material, and with the scenes of Amuro, the children, and with all of that, honestly characterized them all in a really good way. Overall, I like this movie a lot, and that's mainly because it reminded me of something really important. While watching this film, I remembered how much this franchise means to me and how much it has truly impacted my life. My introduction with Gundam was with Gundam The Origin and the original series from the late 70s. Without this franchise, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be here on this channel, as well as the other opportunities that opened up for me. I wouldn't have met the tons of amazing people who also love this franchise, and it allowed me to bond more with my brother, who introduced me to Gundam as we both decided to watch this film together. I guess what I've been trying to say is that this film is something that made me realize how much I love Gundam, and I'm extremely grateful that this film has been made, and the many people around the world can have something similar to the experience I've had over the years. Thank you, Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, for everything you've done for this franchise. This film was one hell of a send-off. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next time.